when you're coloring with them. Another thing, if you are a mixed media artist, one of the great things about these pens, especially if you're going to teach with them, is the fact that they are water-based. So if you teach with them or you teach with ink pads, a product that Ranger's had forever is called Ink Refresher. And this is really a cool product because it's actually a liquid resin. This is designed to rehydrate water-based products. If you have water-based ink pads, water-based markers, water-based paints, paint dabbers, anything that you want to rehydrate, you can simply spray this onto an ink pad and it will rehydrate back as if it were a new pad. Doesn't replace a re-inker, so if you've used the ink out of it, you have to re-ink it. But you know, if you're like me and you're playing and you kind of leave the lids off longer than you should, or you didn't put the caps back on and you know that there's ink in there, you can mist it and it will rehydrate it. Or on your marker, you can just mist it right on your craft sheet. That puts a little resin down in there. And then you can go in with a color and just get a little bit on the tip, and then I'll just show you kind of on the back of the paper. When you first start it, you're just kind of working the resin in, and then you'll see your marker gets really, really wet, but it still goes back to its color. But see how fluid that is now? Because you've rehydrated it with resin, not water. It's pretty cool. But there's also a cool thing you can do with it. It's not designed to do, but who cares? That's what makes it so fun. This is a technique that I did in the compendium book. It gives you the ability to change cardstock or paper into something that is a bit more pliable, almost like fabric. So we've done this at Ranger U with black, but I started doing this with craft because, of course, I needed to add color to it. So I'm going to take the ink refresher and I'm going to spritz it onto paper. It could be cardstock, it could be any rigid paper, it could even be book paper if you wanted to. And then I'm just going to go with my fingers and I just kind of want to rub that into the surface. And I don't want to rub it too hard because I don't want the paper to start to pill up, but I do want to work it into the paper, and you can see that it starts to dry in the paper. You can see how it's absorbing in there, and this is putting resins into the paper. Once you see it start to absorb into the paper, we can go in and we're just going to start manipulating this paper. And we're going to start to wrinkle it, and we'll wrinkle it into a ball. If you were going to stamp, you probably would want to stamp first, but it doesn't mean you can't stamp afterwards. But what's great about this is it completely breaks down the fibers of the paper and gives it a really, really interesting texture. Because you're like, well, I've been able to spray paper with water and wrinkle it, that's great. Yeah, but it still didn't do this. So now I'm going to go with the color of Distress Stain. You could ink it with an ink pad if you wanted to, but the Distress Stains are really going to allow me to ink a large area, short amount of time. Now when you work on craft paper or anything dark, keep in mind that brown paper, when it gets wet, it just turns darker brown. So I'm going to be able to go in with my heat tool just because I want to dry this layer to add another layer. And you'll see as that craft paper dries, that color definitely becomes much brighter, in distress terms anyway. And you don't have to heat set this. You could have let this air dry if you wanted to. Now this is a great technique, especially if you're going to do a journaling class and you want to do a journal cover, or you want to do background for a collage, or you want to have a cool texture of paper, anything like that. And I just want to dry this out. But you can see how fine those wrinkles are in there, which is really good. I'm just going to go in with some color, and I'm just going to add some color. Adding a little bit of vintage photo on there. It could be any color that you want to put over the top. But I love these fine little wrinkles that ink refresher does because it really soaks into the paper. Then I'm going to go in with Perfect Pearls. This is just a mica powder that has a built-in binder, and any sort of moisture this is going to adhere to, including this wrinkled paper. So the great thing about these powders is any sort of ink or paint or anything that's on there, it's going to bond right to that surface. You don't need to use a fixative or anything like that. It's permanently sealed in there. But this paper is dry. So this paper that was once just stock is now something that you can sew through, you can wrap, crease. It's just because of the ink. It's like leather. Yeah, it's because of the resin. You just put resin into the paper, and it's dry. So you could try to iron it, heat it, do whatever, and it just stays like that. It's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah, and it could really be any color. So if you wanted it to be white, I mean, you could have started with white cardstock. If you didn't want to start with craft, you don't have to start with craft. You can really take any sort of cardstock. It's a really strange feeling because you think that it's got to be something like this, but it isn't. And no matter how dry that gets, it will always stay just as pliable. So if you wanted to sew it through a sewing machine or tear it or do anything, you can. It changes the property of paper, but it's also really designed for something like that. It's a neat product. It's a neat little resin product. So a couple other things just to finish up that we can talk about the palette. Cool thing about the palettes, I mean, I showed how we use distress stain in this one, but you can also use other things. Like in this case, this one is Perfect Pearls. One of the cool things about Perfect Pearls, like I was talking about the fact that it already has the binders in it. If I wanted to go in with this product and paint, I could take this, just mix it with water from the water brush, and you can actually make pearlescent paints. The more fluid that becomes. The palette is just taking the Perfect Pearls with water, mixing it up and letting it dry, and once it dries, you can actually go in, it's almost like a crusty little powder, but you can re-wet that and create your own pearlized paints. And this way you can take your colors of Perfect Pearls and create that. And the best part of this is dry, it's permanent. So you don't need to spray anything, it becomes a permanent metallic paint because it's bonded with resins. Now when it comes to alcohol ink, if you're going to use alcohol ink in your palette, you don't want to use a water brush. You don't want to fill a water brush with any sort of solvent. It will seem to work fine at first, but in about 2.5 months, to be exact, it will eat through the water brush.
Not that you've tried.
Or 75 of them. Not that I've tried. But the classes were really fun until we went to use them at Ranger U, and it's like, what? Yeah. So, blending solution. Let's see, where's my pen? Do you see it? Oh, sorry. Just don't know where things go. Shove it in there. So I took our fillable pen. Our fillable pen is just a pen that has removable nibs that you can actually fill with alcohol ink. So this one, I just pulled out this nib, took the blending solution, poured it in there, let it absorb because there's a material in there, replaced the nib, and all I did was have one pen filled with blending solution, because blending solution is to alcohol ink what water is to watercolor. So these alcohol inks I've just dripped into this palette, let them all dry, and now if I want to go in and add color over metal or over glaze or over plastic or over anything like that, I can actually go in just with my blender pen. So it's just going to start out as clear, and as soon as I touch this, it's just going to re-wet, and so I could color right onto plastic, glass, I could go right over specialty stamping paper, I could go onto glossy paper, I can go onto metal, transparencies, anything, and all I have to do to clean this is just swipe it onto the craft sheet, because the blending solution cleans itself and pick up another color. So it's really great to use your palettes for a lot of different things. If you do want to use a paintbrush, because I've used paintbrush with alcohol ink, just use a paintbrush. Because you can take a paintbrush, squirt some blending solution, get it really wet, pick it up and, do glazes over metals or resins, but you certainly don't want to put it in your water brush. It won't go well. I want you to, but you really don't want me to do it. Because it's fun when it's in there, but it's not good at the end. Yeah. So cool. Any questions? It's good, huh?
Yeah.
Didn't take long at all. That did not take long at all.